Welcome to Campus Stories. I am your host, Joe Garris. Here with me today is Daniel Silk, political analyst, author, and Rooney Scholar. Thank you for being here, Daniel.
Great to be with you.
I've also seen that you're known as a futurist, Daniel. What exactly does that mean?
Well, a futurist is someone who doesn't just think about the now, but someone who thinks about how the world is going to change in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years for that matter. So what I do is I provide my clients, which are corporate clients by and large, with evidence of change, technological change, social change, demographic change, how the world is changing. And my clients want to know where the consumers of the future are going to be. Where's their business going to be in the next decade or two? So what we do as futurists, we look at projections. We look at projections for population growth across this planet. We look at projections for which countries of this world are going to grow, at what kind of rate they're going to grow. Where are the new middle classes going to be that are going to purchase products into the future? And I apply that research in my presentations for corporates. Ultimately, it's really fast forwarding the client 10 or 20 years so that they can be prepared for how this world is going to change. You know, the world changes rapidly on an hour by hour basis. So I'm involved in the business of forecasting.
Okay. So a lot like and this is just tossing out terms, like a meteorologist, you take the ideas of what you can see, what you see now, and you try to give an accurate forecast for how things will progress. What kind of clients do you work with mostly?
Well, I work with a wide variety of clients, and it's fascinating because I learn a little bit about their business as well, interacting with them. I work with big engineering companies who are looking at infrastructural developments in new emerging countries of this world. I work with retail groups who want to sell their products to people who couldn't afford to buy products in the past and now can afford to buy luxury goods or basic necessities which are different to what they've consumed in the past. I work with financial services companies who are starting to sell products to people across the world, particularly in developing or poorer countries, who've simply never had access to the same kind of financial services or products that has been available in the Western world for that matter. And that's my main group of clients. It's pretty diverse.
Okay. And you are from South Africa, so you work a lot on the continent of Africa. And Africa is currently emerging as I want to use the word, a economic potential powerhouse.
Yeah.
What are some of the changes that are happening in Africa that you think futurists such as yourself are looking at and saying this is what's going to make a huge impact?
Well, look, the big change that I look at is the population explosion on the African continent. By 2050, a quarter of the entire world's population are going to be African or will live on the African continent. So if you're not preparing now to sell your goods and services into that kind of market with that kind of number, that physical number of consumers, you're going to miss out on that. So we've seen, for example, in the country where I am from, South Africa, that a company like Walmart, with relatively stagnant sales here in the United States, is looking to expand into this new emerging market. Walmart have come into South Africa. They have bought one of our major retail groups in South Africa to establish a foothold on the African continent. So population is critical. But there are other issues. African countries are starting to transform their governments. They're starting to be more transparent and accountable, more efficient, less corrupt as they have been in the past. And this allows their societies also to progress to a point where there's greater competition, where the countries themselves are more attractive for foreigners to invest in. And that's a very critical change that we've seen.
Okay, and I also know you talked in one of your speeches in the last couple months about a corporation called BRICS. Could you go into a little depth on what that is?
Well, BRICS is a term which describes 5 important emerging nations of this world. It's almost like an unofficial club. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. 5 big economies, 5 growing economies, 5 countries who would like to have more of a global role in the world. And this is a group of countries that have formed an unofficial economic alliance. They are assisting each other with trade, they are assisting each other with investment opportunities, and I think in future these countries are going to try to become politically more important in the world as well. The term BRICS was actually coined by a New York banker, Jim O'Neill. It was the BRIC group of countries without the S for South Africa. South Africa was added on over the course of the last few years, and we in South Africa are rather pleased about that because we're now punching above our weight in the big league with the Chinas and the Indias of this world.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. We're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back.
These boys are my heroes. They come every week to spend time with my children.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
They can teach them something no one else can.
Wisconsin.
They're role models to the children, and homework comes way before sports. Their grades have improved, and their lives are just a bit richer. What they do for my kids is truly wonderful.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
I call them my lifeline.
People don't realize how quickly you can end up on the street. One thing happens in your life, medical bills you can't pay, you lose your job, and that's it.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
We went to DC to work with the homeless. They sell a newspaper called Street Sense. Thought I'd help.
But if you want to give more, you can.
This person came up to me and said, "Get a job." And for 2 hours, I felt what it was like to be homeless.
Good morning. $1 help.
Some of the other students said, "How can we change this?" And I said, "Sometimes you can't change the world, but you may be able to change one person's world." My dream? Open a psych clinic for people on the street.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
Welcome back to Campus Stories. I'm here with Daniel Silk. Daniel, you're a Rooney Scholar, but you were also a Rooney Scholar in 2006 at Robert Morris as well. What changes have you noticed in the campus as well as the surrounding area since then?
Well, look, from a physical point of view, the campus has grown. There are buildings that simply didn't exist 8 years ago. The football stadium, various other beautiful buildings. So the campus has just become certainly more urbanized, but it's certainly expanded as well. The biggest difference, frankly, for me, as somebody coming from South Africa, is the climate. I came here in February, and I remember arriving at the Rooney House in mid-February. I didn't know how to start the car in winter. I didn't know how to de-ice the back window. It's a pleasure, I must tell you, being back here in summer. And any future visits, I think, will be arranged for the summer months rather than the winter months.
Yes, the winters here are really cold. Since 2006, there's also been a lot of changes economically and politically in the United States. What are some of the thoughts you have on those political and economic changes?
It's been a very interesting period, and I think for the Western world, not just for the United States, but for the Western world, the harsh effects of the global economic crisis, which have lasted 4 or 5 years, we're just starting to see the United States come out of that. We're seeing Europe crawl its way sort of back into positive territory. But as that crisis has occurred in the West, so these other big new developing markets around the world, the Chinas, the Indias, the Turkeys, the Africas for that matter, have expanded. So the world has become much more competitive as a result of the weakness in the United States and the weakness in the Western world economically as well. And I think that's the big take home for me, is just how competitive and how more balanced the world is becoming economically. It's no longer just a world about the West, about the US and Europe. It's now a much bigger, broader world. Everybody is fighting for their piece of the action.
And I know I was watching one of your previous speeches, and you said that China in the next couple of years will surpass the United States as the world's #1 GDP.
Yes, in terms of this, you're quite right. I mean, in terms of the size of the economy, just the dollar value of the economy, China is going to be, some argue China already might have surpassed the US. I think it'll happen in the next 3 to 5 years or so. That doesn't mean to say that the average Chinese is richer than the average American. Remember, this is the broad GDP of the economy as opposed to the per capita income, which will still mean the US has a substantial lead over the Chinese. But the Chinese are catching up fast. They are consuming more and more. Boeing Aircraft Corporation, their big market for the next 20, 30 years is the Chinese market. The Chinese are going to travel, the Chinese are going to spend, and they're going to outspend the Americans across the world. So we watch this market quite closely. It's quite an exciting market. The Chinese market has its own set of issues clearly into the future. But for the moment, I think the Chinese consumer is going to become more important.
Okay. So just to branch off that, the Chinese consumer is becoming more important in the world. How do you feel that is going to affect American consumers as far as no longer being the #1 GDP? Will there be a continued growth, or will there be losses?
Look, I think that for the United States, they will be more competitive in different areas. And the big plus for the United States going forward, and as a futurist, I always look at this issue, is that the United States, firstly, has a technological base to it that allows it to leverage and use technology. And the US still has a substantial leadership position in that. As technology changes in the course of the next decade, the US can continue to be a leading global economy. But secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, the US is becoming self-sufficient in oil and gas. This is a huge plus for the United States economy going forward. It no longer has to import, or certainly in future will not have to import oil from the Middle East. It can do its own thing, and it can reduce its own production or input costs here in the United States, making its economy more competitive into the future. So yes, you're going to have the Chinese out there, but I think the nature of the US economy is also going to change and mutate and will provide a competitive edge, a positive competitive edge for the US into the future. There are those who are depressed about the United States in the world. You get those who criticize the United States, but I think there's a depth to the United States' global position as one of the leaders of the world, not necessarily the leader of the world, but one of the leaders of the world that's going to last for some time.
Okay. And we're going to go back to your home country of South Africa. You were talking earlier about BRICS. How do you feel that South Africa's growing economy is going to positively affect the world?
Well, South Africa, of course, is a country that was built on commodities, on diamonds and gold. And that's what really put us on the global map. But again, the world is changing. We're moving into a knowledge-based economy where education, where skills, where IT and high-tech development are going to be some of the core issues that will make countries competitive. So South Africa is in a difficult position. It has to adapt its economy from being what I call an extractive economy, taking stuff out of the ground, to really getting people skilled, giving them a quality education, making them competitive in new occupations that are going to become the occupations of the future. And that's the difficulty for a country that's relied upon what's underground. It's really what's in the mind and how you apply your mind now into the future that's going to be critical. So it's a really big challenge for a country like South Africa, and getting our educational system up and running and efficient in the country is what's going to either make us or break us into the future.
Okay. Going off with the whole economics value still, you travel the world a lot because you get to a lot of different countries.
Yeah.
What countries do you feel right at the moment have the most potential to grow?
Well, look, I think that clearly we are, given its population size, and I like big populations, so given their population size, the Chinese are going to grow at about 7.5% GDP per annum for the next year or two. It's pretty good. It's not what it was, but it's pretty good. There's clearly interest there. India, I think, has got tremendous potential. It's underperformed in the course of the last decade or so. There's a new government in India that are more business friendly, and I think with 1.1 billion people and with nearly 500 million teenagers in India alone, you've got a market there waiting to happen. So I like India, I must tell you. But look, I look at the big growth areas around South Africa, in Africa and around South Africa, and we're looking at certainly Nigeria, a country with 200 million people now, with 500 million people by 2050. These are big numbers, and they're waiting to be serviced with goods and services. So I like Nigeria, I like Ghana, oil off the coast of West Africa, Kenya and Tanzania on the east coast, Ethiopia looking good across Africa. And I certainly hope that in South Africa, with our technical expertise, our great infrastructure, we will be able to facilitate and take advantage of some of this growth that's coming from our neighboring countries.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Silk here, and we will talk about his not upcoming book, his book he recently published.
Nicaragua is a completely different world. We were there to bring nursing care to some desperate people.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
The very first person that I met was David. Kept saying, "You have to come to my house and watch me play my trumpet." You could tell from the look on his face that it was just his most prized possession. I get back home. A few weeks later, I got a message that a gang had broken into his house at night and they stole it, which was his life. So next trip back, we gave him a new one. The look on his face was just complete disbelief. He just absolutely couldn't believe it. And to be able to do something like that is one of the best moments of my life. He said he'd never forget us.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
These boys are my heroes. They come every week to spend time with my children.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
They can teach them something no one else can.
Wisconsin.
They're role models to the children, and homework comes way before sports. Their grades have improved, and their lives are just a bit richer. What they do for my kids is truly wonderful.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
I call them my lifeline.
Welcome back to Campus Stories. I'm here again with Daniel Silk. So Daniel, in 2011 you published a book called Tracking the Future, Top Trends That Will Shape South Africa and the World. What are some of the trends that you have been tracking that you feel will shape the world?
Well, certainly some of the trends are what I've spoken about. Population change. Population shifts are very important. The big population growth areas of this world are the future marketplaces of this world. And this is a very important issue to me. Technological change is very critical. The role of the internet. Who's getting the internet? Can we afford the internet? And in many parts of the world, Americans take it for granted. They have got the net, they've got relatively fast speeds here, it's relatively affordable, it's cheap to get online in this country, but in other parts of the world, it's difficult very often to get online. So this ability of people to communicate using connectivity, critical into the future, and the control of the internet, a very interesting issue into the future as well. Governments across the world are getting nervous about the internet. And they are initiating all sorts of controls. Go to certain parts of the world and you will find that you simply cannot access certain websites. Go to China, you can't access Facebook. In China, for that matter, you can access the Chinese version of it, but not the global version of Facebook. So the control of the internet and the control of information in an age in which we all expected information to flow freely across the world, it's becoming an issue. So certainly on technology, certainly on robotics. Robotics are going to change the way we do business. In the agricultural sector, we're going to have drones that are going to be watering and putting fertilizer on crops into the future, taking away jobs from human beings. Digital technologies, what we call 3D technologies, are going to manufacture the spectacles you're wearing on your head. That's going to be manufactured in a machine. A human being who perhaps used to make that is going to be out of work. These are all issues that I look at in the book, along with an extensive chapter on Africa's future and obviously something about my home country, South Africa.
Yeah. going with that, you were talking about robotics and science, the way that's changing the world. What do you, beyond just taking jobs away from people, how do you feel that will impact the way those jobs are done and mass production in the world?
I don't think as human beings currently we adequately understand the effect robotics are going to have on the ability of humans to have a job. And I think we're going to move into a transition process in the world where those of us who are not trained to do particular tasks, but to do more menial tasks for that matter, are going to find it very, very tough. We've got to look at new career options and opportunities into the future. The factory workers of the past, in a sense, are going to be without jobs. Even the medical practitioner, even the general practitioner that you may go to because you've got a fever or you've got a sore throat, that could be diagnosed online using online robotics or online programming. And even that medical practitioner might have to look at different niches into the future where his or her work is going to be a lot more, will have much more longevity into the future. So I think we're going to go through a process of change which we simply haven't quite grasped as to how profound that's going to be because of robotics and connectivity that goes with it.
Okay. You also talked about the internet and globalization and the possibility of having information at your fingertips immediately. How do you feel globalization has affected the economies of everywhere? Really?
You know, it's a good question. And if we were talking 10 years ago, we would have been talking about the world being flat and about there being free trade and about all of the stuff that Tom Friedman spoke about in his great books 10 years ago. Today, the world is a little different. Today, we're almost protecting what we have. Economic insecurity, the role of technology, the desire by some governments across the world still to control the access to information that their citizens have. This hasn't necessarily made the world as flat as we would have liked in terms of that old globalization debate. There's a degree of protectionism where countries are looking after their own industries, their own farmers for that matter. This issue of how we open up markets to the whole world is probably as complex now, and it's probably even more difficult to deal with than we would have predicted 10 years ago. So globalization is taking a slightly different turn in the world right now than it was, and we'll watch this again over the next few years, but it's not quite as flat or accessible or as open as all of us who analyzed this back 10 years ago would have thought. And that's why you've got to look back at what futurists like myself say, and you've got to hold us all to account 10 years later to see whether we do have that insight that we say we do.
Okay, and you talk about the world as being flat. And can you go in a little bit more in depth about what futurists mean by that?
Well, futurists mean that borders come down, that we're all able to trade with one another much more easily. We're all able to cross borders much more easily. And technology allows us to shift resources or funds from one area of the world to another very, very quickly. Aspects of that have come true, clearly. You can invest in South Africa by going online, clicking your mouse, and you can put $100 in a mutual fund in South Africa. You couldn't do that 10, 15, 20 years ago. But on the other hand, what we had expected 10 years ago, a lessening of restrictions, an easier mobility from one society to another, hasn't necessarily occurred. Some of it's happened, some of it hasn't.
Okay. We're going to go to another commercial break, and we'll be right back with Campus Stories.
G-morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
I'm starving. What's for breakfast?
Guten Tag!
Johannes, Ross!
I bring you arts-enriched Raisinblums, fortified with increased test scores and creative problem-solving skills.
It's good!
And good for you. Bobby? Susie? Don't worry, that's just the power of the art.
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
You ever think about buying a bigger place?
Just waiting for a visit from the credit fairy.
There is no credit fairy.
How else will I get a better credit score?
Look, you keep your credit card balances low and only open a new card if you really need it.
No fairy?
There's no magic to improving your credit, but there's help, and it's free. Go to creditfairy.org.
Yes, ready, ready.
Oh, come on, Randy. Animal shelter, here I come. And no, I'm not crazy or emotionally damaged. That's a stereotype. I just belong to a total loser. I'm a good dog. So if you want a pet, adopt. And if you see Randy, tell him he dropped his wallet.
Welcome back to Campus Stories. So Daniel, you will be giving a speech on campus about South Africa 2014 and beyond, highlighting socio-political and economic changes and prospects for the country of South Africa. Can you give us a little bit of like a preview for that speech?
Yeah, look, South Africa is a great story. It's had a turbulent history, a history of colonial conquest, of racial segregation, of a transition from a white minority government to a majority, effectively black government in the country, all within the last 20, 25 years. It's something like a soap opera, South Africa, when you analyze the pluses and the minuses. And that's really what I want to do. I want to just look at this transition that we've had in South Africa. We have a new democracy, we have a new constitution in South Africa. Only in the last 20 years or so, we've got the legacy of the past, of the suspicions of the various racial groups. And of course, we've got to battle a competitive global economy. We've got to change our own domestic economy, and we've got to think forward and think into the future as well as South Africans. So, you know, it's a great sort of puzzle to put together in a talk. South Africa is a complex country, and that's what I'll try and explain. And I'll try and simplify it, at least in my talk, to present an overview of where we've been, how we've got through what we've got through, and perhaps where we're going in the future. I'm a kind of an honest guy. There's some good, there's some not so good stuff about where we're at the moment, and I think we need to discuss it and explore it. I'm sure it'll resonate with the students and with anyone else who's interested in coming across.
Okay. So how do you think students will most likely relate your speech back to their own lives?
Well, I think they'll see some problems that we have in South Africa as being similar in a sense to what they have experienced or have seen historically in the United States as well. We do grapple with some similar issues clearly, especially in terms of the economy, but I think there are some critical differences clearly. And I think for students it's interesting to see how a major country on the African continent like South Africa, it has dealt with its own transition, how it has changed. For example, in South Africa, and I always say this to students, we changed our national anthem, we changed our flag 20 years ago. This was a tough issue for South Africans. Imagine if an American had to wake up one morning and find that their flag had changed and their national anthem had changed, something you would never ever think or dream of. In South Africa, we had a political change, and it went hand in hand with changing the symbols of the country. And we had to adapt to that, which we did. But I think that's of interest to an American audience, to understand where we've come from and how we are trying to work through our problems, warts and all.
Okay. Well, thank you, Daniel, for coming on the show. This has been Campus Stories with Daniel Silk, political analyst and futurist. He is your Rooney speaker for 2014, and he will be giving a speech tomorrow, Thursday, September 11th.